chapter 5 last week, so we've got 2 verses to do today to kind of catch us up. By way of review, we were talking about the sin was incest. But the problem, even though that is a problem, the problem that Paul was addressing was the fact that the church was putting up with it. And his directive was that they should basically exercise what we call church discipline and expel the brother. He was a Christian man, and he shouldn't be allowed to function in the church. It drags the church down, gives the church a bad name, gives Christ a bad name, and so he says he needs to be expelled from the fellowship. So, that is a quick review, but it brings us to verse 12 and 13. And Paul concludes with a final statement to expel the wicked man from the fellowship, is what he calls him. So let me read verse 12 and 13. What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Expel the wicked man from among you. Okay, these are rhetorical questions. Basically, the answer should be obvious, but why should I even consider judging those outside of the church? Those outside of the church, he would be saying, are non-believers. Why do I even need to even consider judging them? God will judge them, right? We are to judge those inside of the church, which we would assume are believers. Believers judge believers. And we're to judge. We were talking about church discipline. He said we're to judge those inside of the church, which are believers. This is disciplinary judgment of Christians. Disciplinary. They've already been saved. So now, how are we to function in the environment of the church in an orderly way, in a righteous way, if you let me use that term? Okay, so not evaluation of their faith for purposes of determining salvation. They're already saved. The responsibility for disciplinary action rests with the entire church. And that was the problem. The entire church was not doing anything about this guy that was steeped in a habitual, ongoing sin that was blatant and needed to be dealt with. So it's not just Paul, but he says he is only giving them direction. And the final plea from Paul is to expel the wicked man. He calls him unresolved public sin, such as this sexual immorality, affect both the individual and the corporate body. You know, this one guy that we were talking about was involved in a sexual relationship with his father's wife, so he's going to be affected, and he was a believer, so he's going to be affected in a negative way, and the fact that he's allowed to remain in the church affects the corporate body in a negative way also. So such things reflect badly on God, particularly if they are unaddressed by the church. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter, but I wanted to talk about Galatians 6. That was the reason I quit last week, because I knew it would be too hard to rush through that. Up until now, in 1 Corinthians 5, we see Paul as if he is ready to have this wicked guy drawn and quartered. I mean, he's talking to the whole church, and he's very direct with them on everything that he's talked to him about. He's going to continue to be direct with them for the rest of the book. But it sounds like he's ready. He could choke the guy. He's so mad, and he could choke the individual members of the church at the same time. But that's why I want to study Galatians 6, because that's not what Paul is preaching. He's not, like I said last week, he's not preaching, Blake, you hold the door open while I throw the guy out. It's not that at all. Paul is always bent on restoration. His preference is to get the guy restored, to get the guy to a point of repentance, and so he can get on with his recovery inside the church. It's when that has been tried and does not bear any fruit that the guy is expelled from the body, okay? But Paul said that and Paul was totally appalled at this whole process, and he said that this was a sin that one that not even the pagans put up with, if you recall that. But the reality is that Paul, I think, is more disgusted with their tolerance of it. He called them arrogant and apparently unwilling to address the problem and the effects of the church body. But Paul does not want them to associate with blatantly sinful believers, but he does not want them to throw them out of the church without attempting to have a time of healing and repentance. He wants restoration, and he wants them to come to the conclusion that discipline is necessary and it should be done gently, not harshly. That's my point that I want to make today as we wrap this chapter up. It sounds like he is talking harshly about this whole process, but the reality is, if you look at his whole teaching on that subject throughout the New Testament, he wants it to be done gently. The end result may be Blake's going to hold the door open, I'm going to throw him out. That might be the end result, but it's going to be done in a gentle way. Okay, and that's what I want to talk about now. So Galatians 6, chapter 6, verse 1 says this. Galatians 6, verse 1. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. There's a key word, restore him gently. But watch yourself, or you may also be tempted. In the process of counseling this guy, if you're not careful, you're liable to get caught up in the same thing that he's going through. Okay, now this is these are general guidelines we're talking about in Galatians. We're not talking about that one guy specifically now. We're talking just church discipline in general. So try to restore him and do it gently. The last part of verse 6 through verse 5 is a warning against them against being drawn into the same sin, but more than that, it is a warning against arrogance. And when I say arrogance, I mean restore them gently. Don't lord it over them. You know, you're the one in the power. You're the one that's doing the church discipline. You're not you. It won't ever be one person that's doing it. It's 2 or 3 guys that will have that responsibility of counseling the guy. And don't do it in a way where you're lording it over him, where he feels like you've got your hand on him, just pressing him down. That's not gentle. Gentleness is done with a soft heart, kid gloves, and that's the way it's supposed to be dealt with. I think this is relating to I already said that. The final note is something I want to read to you. Martin Luther was counseling a pastor about how to counsel in church disciplinary situations. And the best I can do, I can't quote it, but what Martin Luther said was, you should do it gently, as a mother handling her own child. With kid gloves, basically. That's a pretty good way to look at it. We need situation of church discipline, harsh as the situation is. I mean, you may have a guy that's really rebellious, and it's not like you have to get one guy to sit on him and hold him down while you preach to him. It's not that kind of thing. It needs to be, even if he's belligerent, You do the best you can, as gently as you can. You're not going to be in an argumentative situation, but you do it as gently as you can, as best you can, and if it doesn't bear fruit, then he's to be expelled from the fellowship, with the idea that maybe you planted the seed, and the next guy gets down the road, gets another opportunity to talk to the guy about it. So that's